Richard Widmark was an icon of classic Hollywood, cold, stern, and principled. But just before leaving this world, Richard Widmark broke decades of silence. In a shocking confession, he specifically named 5 actors he could never forgive throughout his life. And that list will shock you. The journey of an unknown Minnesota boy. Richard Widmark was born in Sunrise, a small Minnesota town, but his family didn't stay there long. Just a year later, they moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his father, Carl Henry Widmark, began working as a traveling salesman. Not long after his mother, Ethel May, gave birth to his younger brother, Donald, on July 25th, 1918. The 2 brothers grew up close, remaining bonded until the end of their lives. Richard once shared that his love for cinema stemmed from his Scottish grandmother, a devoted fan of cowboy actor Tom Mix. When Richard was just 4 years old, his grandmother would take him to the movies too, even 3 times a week. From then on, a quiet seed of passion grew within him. The family continued to move due to Carl's work until they finally settled in Princeton, Illinois. There, his father opened a bakery called Henry's Bakery. They lived in a small apartment above the shop, finally having a stable home to put down roots. At Princeton High School, Richard was a bright student, played football, and even served as his senior class president. However, during his 3rd year of college, his parents separated. His mother, Ethel, decided to stay in Princeton to raise her 2 sons. Until they graduated, Richard finished high school in at 32 and earned a scholarship to Lake Forest College, with plans to become a lawyer. During his studies, he continued to play football and won 3rd place in a state oratorio competition. Despite his shyness, he also participated in school plays, and though few knew it, he began to fall in love with acting. Then he feared people would see it as a weakness, but the flame of the stage couldn't be extinguished. And then destiny appeared, in the form of Ora Jean Hazelwood, a fellow drama student who also harbored grand dreams for the stage. The demonic grin that opened Hollywood's gates. She became his destiny. Richard graduated in 1936 and was invited to stay on at the college teaching drama and elocution for 2 years. But then in 1938, he decided to pack his bags and head for New York, where a friend invited him to try his hand at radio. Coincidentally, Jean Hazelwood was also in New York studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Richard began landing roles in radio plays like A. Jenny's Real Life Stories, and his career quickly took off. On April 5, 1942, just months after the U.S. entered World War II, Richard and Jean were married in Evanston, Illinois, the bride's hometown. Richard once confessed he had never flirted with anyone else since meeting Jean. "I accidentally fell absolutely in love with my wife," he said. That marriage lasted 55 years without a single scandal in Hollywood. Richard wanted to join the military, but was rejected due to a perforated eardrum. Meanwhile, Donald, his younger brother, was deployed to Europe in 1943. Cruel fate struck when Donald's plane was shot down over the Netherlands. He was the sole survivor of the crew and endured over a year in a German prisoner of war camp. Although later freed, he never fully recovered. Headaches, partial paralysis, and then in 1955, Donald died from a brain tumor at the age of 37. Richard did everything he could to care for his brother. He once said the government couldn't fully comprehend the pain Donald endured. Back in 1943, when Richard and Jean were worrying about Donald, Richard began laying the foundation for a new chapter in his career. He appeared on Broadway in the play Kiss and Tell, and also participated in shows entertaining American soldiers. At this time, he was earning a living from both radio and theater. In 1945, they welcomed their first child, and Heath Widmark, born on July 25th. Not long after a fateful door opened again, he was offered the role of the killer Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death opposite Victor Mature. But director Henry Hathaway didn't believe Richard was suitable. He thought Richard was too intelligent with a high forehead that clearly showed intellect. Nothing like a cold-blooded killer. Despite director Henry Hathaway's objections, Darryl F. Zanuck was insistent and Richard Widmark got the part. No one expected this to be his debut film, and in his very first scene he created a cinematic nightmare. But audiences couldn't look away. They loved how much they hated his character, and Fox immediately signed him to a 7-year contract, despite the fact that he previously had to accept a terrible deal just to play Tommy Udo. In 1948, he starred in Yellow Sky alongside Gregory Peck and in Baxter, 5 unforgivable names in Hollywood. Before we continue with the rest of Widmark's life, it's time to return to the core. The people he disliked most in the acting world. In 1951, Richard participated in Halls of Montezuma, a World War II film set on a Japanese-occupied island. He acted alongside Carl Malden, an old friend from his radio days, and also Jack Palance, Richard Boone, as well as Robert Wagner, who was very young at the time and had just received his first credited role. The following year, 1952, Widmark co-starred with Marilyn Monroe in Don't Bother to Knock. He once described Marilyn as a fragile soul, a broken-winged bird. She craved the spotlight, but feared the world around her. She often hid in her dressing room for hours, and when dusk fell, the entire crew patiently waited for her to emerge so they could finish the day's filming. She often forgot her lines, and during filming, you'd think she's terrible. But when the film was edited, Marilyn appeared as beautiful as an illusion. Despite many rumors about her off-screen relationships, Richard affirmed, "Not with me." She didn't even flirt with anyone. In 1954, he reunited with Robert Wagner, this time in Broken Lance alongside Spencer Tracy. That film concluded his 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Now 40 years old, Widmark felt it was time for a different direction. He was exhausted from constant filming. More importantly, he believed he could be freer and earn better money as an independent actor. His daughter once said her father was a family man fond of a simple life. At that time, their family lived on a peaceful farm in the San Fernando Valley. Yearning for creative control, Widmark established his own company, Heath Productions, named after his daughter and his middle name. But 1956 brought a deep cut. His beloved mother, Ethel May, passed away just a year after Donald's death. Widmark didn't talk much about the people he disliked in Hollywood, but industry insiders, longtime co-stars, they knew. There were names that tested his patience. Whether it was due to ego, laziness, or arrogance, he could not tolerate those who didn't respect the art of acting. And according to those who knew him best, there were 5 people he truly couldn't stand, regardless of their fame. The first was Frank Sinatra. He could charm the world, but he couldn't sway Richard Widmark. They collaborated in The Detective in 1968, and it was an experience that annoyed Widmark to his core. Sinatra's sloppy attitude, frequent tardiness, and habit of performing casually without preparation all went against the iron discipline Widmark valued. Afterwards, someone in the crew made Widmark feel as if everything was just a meaningless game. For him, acting was sacred. For Sinatra, it was just another mundane chore. The second person on the list was Marlon Brando. Widmark always held conflicting emotions about Brando. He acknowledged Brando's prodigious talent, even calling him brilliant. But he couldn't stand the chaos Brando brought with his method acting. Brando behaved erratically, often not learning his lines and improvising uncontrollably, which infuriated Widmark. Although they never worked together, Widmark was once quoted with a loaded remark, "Some people need chaos to create. I need focus." Many believe those words were a sharp jab aimed directly at Brando. The third was Tony Curtis. During the filming of The Long Ships in 1964, Widmark and Curtis shared the screen, but no friendship. Curtis was notoriously vain, spending hours grooming himself in front of a mirror rather than reading the script. To him, the film set was a fashion runway. To Widmark, it was a battleground for art. Their conflict was so palpable that the entire crew felt the chilly atmosphere. An assistant once exclaimed, Widmark didn't hate Curtis for who he was, but for the person he pretended to be. For Widmark, Curtis focused too much on appearance, neglecting the soul of the character. The fourth, Robert Mitchum, a nonchalant individual fond of alcohol and famous for his couldn't-care-less attitude. Mitchum embodied Hollywood cool, but for Widmark, that nonchalance felt like a slap in the face to his artistic conviction. Mitchum once proudly stated that he didn't need much preparation. Just showing up on set and reading his lines was enough. For Widmark, every role was a battle, a fight for truth, and Mitchum's phoning it in attitude truly angered him. Though they belonged to the same era, they were like two opposing magnetic poles. Widmark once whispered to a friend after watching Mitchum act, "You can't get to the top without sweating." And finally, the most shocking name, Kirk Douglas. Douglas and Widmark were both masculine, powerful, and fiery icons. And it was precisely this similarity that was the seed of conflict. Widmark believed Douglas always wanted to dominate the frame. His booming voice, intense expressions, and desire to overshadow every co-star were unbearable for Widmark. It was rumored that Widmark once refused to work with Douglas for a chilling reason.